Hey everyone, I'm Connor,
And I'm Jeff.
and this is the Sad Boy Sessions Emotional Identity in Christ. It's been a while. We had
A hot minute.
we've had just scheduling conflicts up the wazoo. You were sick one of these days.
It's true. It's a couple weeks back. Yep.
There was we had Together Tuesday, but now here we are post Valentine's Day. Oh, what a time to get back to it.
In the thick of the winter games
Yes, that is true.
that Connor refuses to view.
I refuse to watch it. Hold it somewhere else.
There we go. And that's all we're going to be talking about the Olympics.
Okay, but how about this? What is your favorite Winter Olympic event?
Ooh.
Besides like hockey, that doesn't really count.
How does hockey not
It's
count?
because it's like it just is already.
It's a sport played generally
Yeah.
throughout the years
Yeah,
instead
yeah.
of just at the Winter Olympics. I mean, curling, of course, is a fan favorite of recent years.
Yeah.
Mostly just because of the personality that we've seen exhibited in the sport of curling.
Yeah, the personality we field as Americans.
Indeed, as middle-aged dads
Yeah.
with long hair. This year I got really into. I know you haven't been watching, but just seeing Shaun White's departure on the half pipe was really cool, and watching half pipe snowboarding was pretty legit. My wife loves, of course, ice skating, but that's not necessarily as much my jam. But definitely watched a good amount of that as well.
The speed skating, that's intense.
The three man team speed skating is just a whole other animal. It's one thing when you're racing against one other person, but when there's three of you and there's in this unison uniform line, just it's both impressive and intimidating all at once.
I feel like one of the sillier ones is the cross country skiing, where they're just doing this until they're done.
Okay, I was
It's more
actually
like an elliptical.
When I watched the beginning of that, they were like literally all going uphill together, and in my mind, the track that was playing was when Vader goes to the Jedi Temple in Episode 3, da da dun da da dun dun,
On his way to kill the younglings.
because they're just all in unison going whoosh whoosh whoosh. It was perfect. I'm like, you could put any like imperial or like military march music behind that, and it would have been chef's kiss. Perfect editing.
Yeah. I think bobsledding always holds a special place because of cool runnings. And then also, I mean, God bless the guys who do the skeleton, because that is just laying their lives on the line for no reason. How do you even practice that?
A baffling activity. I don't know.
Practice it to the point where you're good at it without having first died.
That's why they call it the skeleton. First guys did die.
Apparently.
Oh man, we are getting off to an interesting beginning.
Yeah, so if you're going to do the skeleton, you're going to need to have a lot of faith. Wow, look how we tied that in.
Wow, like a glove.
Jeez. Yeah. Okay, so today's episode, it's been a while, so refresh your memory. Jeff and I, we choose a specific emotion, and I can be honest with you, the more we do these episodes, though, we might have to change the format. We're going to run out of emotions eventually. But
I wonder if it's like color. It's like we cover the primary colors, and then we just start. What happens when you cross
blend
fear
faith
and
and
hope?
anger?
Fear, hope equals doubt. I don't know.
Today's topic is the Sith. So we pick an emotion, and we kind of talk about how that emotion has manifested itself in our lives over the recent past, over the past year, and then historically over our lives. And then we turn to Scripture and see what it has to say about that emotion. If it's a seemingly negative emotion, what hope does it offer? If it's a positive emotion, or a seemingly positive emotion, does Scripture tell us to pump the brakes on it? So this one is hope, which I don't know that's necessarily an emotion. It's emotion adjacent. But hope and faith is technically.
It's interesting because you feel it,
yes.
right?
You
well,
can feel hopeful.
sometimes. So it is kind of emotion adjacent. Like, I don't know. we'll of course talk about it during this episode, but it is just one of those interesting things. Like, I don't think there would be a unified, but not necessarily everyone experiences the same emotions the same way, but
True.
just like to feel hopeful. We know what that feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it fits.
Yeah. So over the past, well, let's just do, since 2022 has begun, how have you seen hope / faith manifest itself in your life?
Yeah. So starting off the new year. Well, this past weekend, my wife and I went on a marriage retreat with First Pres. So,
Indeed.
It's interesting. Speaking of like faith and hope and all that, and I think in past episodes I've talked about how like usually when I look back, I see a lot of the Lord's faithfulness when you look back on kind of things you hoped for, and I think for a lot of kind of probably from like 24, 25ish on, I was kind of like ready to get married. I think I longed for the idea of marriage before that, but I just didn't always necessarily feel ready and like actively searching for it until I was probably 25. And then so like looking back on like going on this marriage retreat, I just feel like seeing my hopes answered in a sense of like, man, I want to be married. And it's like, now I'm married, and we just got to go on this marriage retreat, and it was really great to be around other couples, and kind of just for the first time, us being 5 months married. We weren't the most newly married couple, because our friends Matthew and Sydney were there, who have been 2 months married. But just looking back and just having that as kind of a milestone to be like, we were able to go on these retreats together because we've crossed that threshold that like at one point I just didn't even have a semblance was like actually on the horizon, but was definitely something I had faith in and hope for, that like someday that's gonna be part of my story. And so it's just really cool in 2022 to enter the new year, like really my first new year as a married man. Like, I know I've talked a lot about getting married, but it's a big life milestone, and it really is full of emotions, a lot of the ones we've already talked about, and of course has a major impact on this one because it's hard to be in a Christian relationship, let alone a Christian marriage, when you're not pondering and informing your life with a sense of hope and faith.
Mm-hmm. So since you've been married, how have you seen the things you hope for change? Now that you're not hoping to be married, you already are.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think at the end of the day, it gets really interesting because like while we were on that retreat, you hear a lot of great stories of couples who have come together and just getting to know other people, but there's also like a lot of really hard stuff that in a lot of ways like it's hard because I think thinking back on the past weekend, like there's couples that shared some stories of things they've gone through in their marriage, and sometimes it's like cancer. It's like you don't hope for like some deep sickness, but in some weird way you see how coming out on the other side of it, they've been strengthened by that experience, and their faith has been strengthened by that experience. And it's like it's weird. It's like I don't think I would like hope for that kind of a trial, but at the same time to see the Lord's faithfulness in it to those who have experienced those sorts of difficulties, while being people of faith. It's interesting because I'm like I don't necessarily know what the perspective is for folks who don't necessarily believe as we do when it comes to those kinds of deep life trials of cancer, sickness, pain, infidelity, even like what does that look like in light of faith or not faith. Like I just think it's interesting to see those trials, and it's like I wouldn't hope for those things, but it's like I think a lot of my genuine hopes are kind of the ones that come with passing that one milestone is like, okay, looking forward to what the next things are, like, hoping one day to start a family and hoping one day to, own our own home, and what does that journey look like, and how can you, trust in God's provision for that. And also hoping for it, but also like having faith that God's plan is bigger than whatever plans we make for ourselves, I think is kind of maybe what's at the root of that is, a lot of these folks that shared the difficulties, like they do have families and they do have financial success and all that, but it's like, but they also have these other, pieces of life that come along with that. So while you can hope for those things, it's like at the same time, you might also be met with great trials. So just, I think having open hands and being very like present and mindful of, what are today's blessings, not getting too caught up in, the material things that we hope for, but, ultimately hoping for a life that is full and rich and full of relationships, love, and ultimately, the Lord and in kind of the ways that he manifests in those various aspects of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, over this past month and a half or so, it's fitting, as is my wont, I talk about my singleness. Today is National Singles Day.
Oh, is it the day after Valentine's Day as opposed to, I thought it was the day before.
Hey, it's every day of the year as far as I'm concerned.
So dark.
30 years running. So, well, it's interesting because I find, okay, so with hope and faith, like at this stage of my life, being that I'm knocking on 30, I haven't really had any trials per se in the recent past that I could be like, oh yeah, that was a tough period that I really needed a lot of faith in order to have God kind of help me get out of that, outside of just like spiritual valleys.
Mm-hmm.
But over the past month and a half since 2022 started, like the year started and I was, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks into dating someone, and then I ended that like a week or two later. So, which was to that point, and still is, the longest I had ever dated somebody. I broke my record of 2 dates. It got up to like 4.
Hey, that's like double.
Yeah.
It's a 100% increase.
It is, yeah. But the problem was that, like, the person who I was dating, was awesome. We had a lot in common, and I just didn't romantically get there in terms of like, which is weird because literally I think like 2 or so weeks into dating, I asked her if she wanted to be exclusive and be boyfriend and girlfriend. She's like, no, I still want to wait a little longer, which was fair. But also, I don't know. That whole thing was kind of strange to me because it felt like it felt like she was pursuing me harder than I was pursuing her. So to have me ask her that and she say no was like, well, that's weird. But honestly, I'm glad she did, because it was a couple weeks later that I realized that like, oh, I don't really actually think of her in like a romantic way. So I'm glad she had the wherewithal to be like, no, I kind of want to wait a little longer, as opposed to me, who was like, oh boy, look, this is as far as I've gone. Let's lock this down now, and then this is the one, and it's just like, well, no. But so the whole in 2022, we're seeing like marriages happening, engagements happening, and we've discussed it before on previous episodes, but but it's just like, okay, so when's this happening for me? And then so that's like, nowadays it feels like that's just kind of like my general hope is I hope to find a woman who loves the Lord and that I can get in a relationship with and marry, and etc. Which is honestly not a great thing to admit that like that's all I hope for nowadays, as opposed to hoping to grow in my faith or something that would actually be like a kind of make me a quote unquote better Christian or something like that, or something that isn't a self-centered hope, but nonetheless, like, that is my primary hope. And it's largely because I see so many relationships happening and engagements and marriage and all that stuff. And feel like I'm just kind of like twiddling my thumbs being like, all right, well, what's the deal? But that raises the question of, okay, what if God just, and I don't believe he is. I don't believe he is calling me to a life of singleness. Mm-hmm. But the question is, let's say he is. Let's hypothetically say he is. Am I okay with that? Mm. And no, I'm not. Like, there are times during my life when I am perfectly okay with being single, like in the moment. But long term, it's like, I don't want to not be able to like share my life with someone. That sounds terrible. But that is the case with like, sometimes God calls people to singleness, and you just like, all right, are you willing to kind of die to yourself in that way to like somehow that will further advance God's kingdom, like that person's singleness somehow. I don't know God's methods. We never will. But yeah, so in the recent few weeks, that's been the main hope.
Yeah, and I don't think that's, I mean, that's not certainly not uncommon. But like one thread that I think is interesting there, which relates a little bit back to what I had shared too, is, you know, whether it's things that you hope for, like a relationship, or things that you don't necessarily hope for, like, you know, a severe or chronic illness or something, noting that God can be present in both those situations. And in fact, like, oftentimes, like, I feel we could talk about this when we kind of like zoom out a little bit further into other parts of our lives, but like, oftentimes it's in those valleys that you described that God's presence almost makes himself more felt, like at different junctures. At least in my experience, I think I've seen that come through in a lot of ways. And then, but it's like, you know, just seeing that he's present in all pieces of that story is really cool. And I've definitely seen it not just in my own life, but other people's lives where sometimes those themes have played out that way. But yeah, no, I think that's makes perfect sense, especially because that's what's around, you know, like, is those things. There's like, when you were talking, there was like this Hallmark proverb where I'm like, I'm sure this is a quote that somebody said that was more than just like a Hallmark person, but it's like, the like, you don't realize that God is all that you need until God is all that you have. It's just like really? But then like, well, okay. So some people where I've like, it's like, you know, they go through life, they find that relationship, they find that marriage, they have like 3 kids, they're like entering their 30s, and then their spouse dies suddenly.
Yeah.
And it's just like everything you hope for, like, and also like Job, like, just to go straight to scripture,
yes,
just to have all the things and then just have like the carpet yanked out. And then what does faith look like in that circumstance? It's just like, okay, yeah, like what like this, it's not, I think oftentimes there's this, at least culturally in Christianity, I feel like for a time, and you'll still find it with like Joel Osteen and other people, it's just like, find your faith in God, then life is up and to the right from that point forward. It's like, just like everything's going better and better. But it's just, if that's true, like what you're measuring on your X and Y axis probably isn't the right stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, okay, wealth and success, they go straight up after I found Jesus. It's like, that may be true, but that shouldn't be how you're defining your life or your journey or your progress in life.
You should be pursuing Jesus so that you can become wealthy and successful.
Right. Like, it's just, you've seen people do it, and just how at one point or another, the charade falls apart. Yeah. It's like a house of cards waiting to just get flicked over. So
it's also not, it's not like everyone who follows Jesus is wealthy and successful.
Right. Statistically, if you look at, the global faith, most are not.
Yeah. If you get outside the United States,
out of our, postmodern Western bubble, it's like, most of the Christian church throughout the world is not only probably borderline destitute, but outside of the West is very actively persecuted. So it's like that can't be your reason for, for finding the Lord and pursuing a relationship with God. And honestly, and that's one of those things where I'm like, if you're able to visit with some of those folks who are of faith, who are in persecuted minorities, you'll find that they're far and away more spiritually rich than you probably have ever felt. And so it brings in that kind of like upside down kingdom mentality or view of like, the things that I'm hoping for, are they really the right things?
Right.
Like, are those the things that are going to lead me into the most full and rich and, God's presence filled life? Or, is there something to be said about trial and hardship? And I think Scripture speaks on that a lot, of like that is where God's presence is felt almost in ways more deeply, all with the hope of the return of the king.
We don't mean Aragorn.
And we don't mean Aragorn.
All right.
Things I don't have hope for. The rings of power.
Gosh. Oh, man. Okay, so...
I know, I just threw a monkey wrench into that whole thing, but it just came into my mind when I said Return of the King. I was like, oh, that teaser.
Oh, man. Okay, so then how about, so over the past, I don't know, year or a few years, whatever, semi-recent past, how has hope and faith played out in your life?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if we've discussed this like on Sad Boy sessions at all. If not, like now seems to be the time. So February 6th was the 4th. It's February 15th now. So last week and some change was 4th anniversary of my dad passing.
Yeah.
So like doing a slightly bigger, like last 5 years, zoom out. I think kind of my biggest faith journey has been moving forward after the death of a parent, and specifically a death of a parent that was early, or like earlier than expected. He was 63 at the time of his passing, so he was not very old, but not crazy young. It was just like not really in the range at which you're like, okay, yeah, your parents are probably gonna pass. Like, God willing, I'll have my mom for another many decades.
Yes.
But it was just one of those things where I'm like, okay, it's like, what do I believe? Like, my father was a Christian. Like, like why would such a thing happen to him? And it's like, I'm a believer, so it's like, why would the Lord take my father from me at like right when I just feel like I became a man, like graduating college, kind of like setting off on my own journey, and then like all of a sudden you lose one of your chief mentors and spiritual guides in life. It was just, it was like shocking, but over the last, that 4 or 5 years has also been some of like the most rich growing experiences of my life. In light of him passing, like, I think it really was a galvanizing event of like, I have to become my own person too. Which I don't think you need to wait until your parents pass or are no longer like party, or, you know, whoever your like chief, you know, parental figure is in your life. Like, I don't think you need to wait for them to like pass from this world for that to be like a journey that you undertake. It just, mine happened to coincide with that kind of chronologically. Yeah. And like at first I was like very, like for like a whole year after that, I was very like, you know, honestly pretty depressed, like just pretty like, it probably took me until like the following April to start feeling kind of normal again. Like around my birthday the next year, I was like kind of coming out of like this just year-long season of just like down and doubting and like not understanding like why this is where my life is at this moment. Like I went through a really rocky first job. Like 2 months after that, I had switched from like an internship to a full-time job, and it just doesn't go well because I was so, you know, just in the rut. But like coming out of it, there was so much of like understanding that like, where is my hope placed? Like, where is my faith placed? Because eventually, like, and it just really drove home this idea of like, all the material things, all of the personal relationships I have in this world will eventually, like, outside of kind of the metaphysical understanding, like my experience of them in this world is going to pass. Like, so there's just this like renewed richness to life of like, okay, you can either take that and maybe go like one of multiple ways, but primarily one of two. You can say, okay, none of this is last, so none of it matters, and I don't have to worry about any of it, and just kind of like go your own way, become a hermit, and just like not attached to anybody. Or you can kind of lean into life and say, you know, if I'm only here for this short amount of time, and I think sometimes we've talked about kind of Ecclesiastes, where it has like this feeling of like there's a season for everything in life, and, you know, life itself is a breath, like a vapor, like just a, you know, blowing of the wind. You can either take that and run away from it, or you can take that and just live into it and try to fully extract each moment, you know, for the joys and pains that are in it. And I kind of decided after a year of doing the former to try to like kind of shut myself away from everybody. I was like, well, this is a pretty crummy way to live. So I very much moved in the other direction, was like, how can I more fully, you know, extract these pieces of joy and pain and sorrow from life? Like, just how can I live it and be in it and exist and be, and yeah, it was that idea of like, my hope is in the Lord. I know my father's was. We will be reunited someday, but until that day comes, like, I have a life to live, and there's so much more that God probably has for me. Like, that was not the end of that journey. It was just a milestone in it. And so, a significant one, but still just a milestone. Like, and now 4 years later, like being married and kind of moving into my own position of headship for a family, like, my father kind of comes with me in that in a lot of ways, where like his principles, his ideals, you know, both his successes and failings as a father and family man, of which he had certainly both. Like, I'm still learning from him, even though he's not here to like share it directly with me. And so I think that there's definitely some beauty in that.
I can't remember the timeline of this, but was when you started to have like that turnaround, was that around the time when you and Jen started dating?
Jen and I started dating a little bit later. So like 2 months later, like, okay. Cause it was February of 2018 is when he passed. April of 2019 is kind of when I feel like right around my birthday that year, I felt like I kind of rose out of the funk. Like I was finally excited for something again. I'm like, oh yeah, it's my birthday. Like, let me get together with my friends, and people have just been very near to me through the experience for sure. But it was about that time where I was like, I think I can try to live a normal life again. And then, yeah, Jen and I kind of reconnected probably like May of that year. Like late May is probably when we had our first date. So, yeah, again, it was kind of that turning of the corner of like, I'm going to lean into life. You know, like, here's a pretty girl. Let me take her out on a date.
Yeah.
Life's short.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I didn't remember the timeline of that, but it does. I'm sure there's something to say about like you coming out of that funk and starting to just be like, you know what, this isn't a way I should live, and let me live a different way, and then that is somehow, I don't know what I'm even getting at, that's somehow like could have led to that relationship. Like if you were still in that same mode that you were in, would Jen have still wanted to pursue you?
Yeah, that's a great question. We would have to bring her on as a guest to truly understand that. But I mean, we definitely still, like, we had some ties. Even when my dad did pass, she came to the funeral, and I had no idea about that until we were like dating. Like, I was in such tunnel vision, like that day of, like, I had no idea she was there.
Yeah.
But like, even, you know, we kind of chatted about it since it was the anniversary of his passing, you know, like last week, and she even brought up the idea of like, you know, like, I didn't know what was in my heart at that time, but like clearly I cared for you and your family in a way that I didn't fully understand yet. Which was cool to kind of see that, yeah, there probably were some threads there that existed, you know, well before we formally started dating. So, you know, I don't think you're wrong, like, in a sense of like, when I did turn that corner emotionally, like, there probably was, because I learned so much about myself. Like, that's probably when I really fully lived into this whole sad boy thing, honestly. Like,
right.
if I look back, it's probably like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Is when I was like, yeah, I have because it takes a big loss like that takes you on a huge emotional journey, and you can either like shut it all away, which I did as much as I could for the first bit, or you can explore it and try to understand it and actually grieve and feel all the things that you're feeling, and, you know, try to understand what's happening under the hood during that kind of a period. And I don't think it's necessary. I think we can explore our emotions with outside of that. I think it becomes a necessity once you've experienced something traumatic. You know, I think it's just a very difficult fork in the road to be like, yeah, I'm just going to bundle up my trauma, never talk about it, and never explore it, and just keep it back here. Because I know it has to manifest itself in other ways at that point. It would just be in a misunderstood and probably uncontrolled way if I didn't approach it the way that I did.
Yeah. I'll get into a story about someone passing away after I talk about what I'm going to talk about.
Shoot.
So, because that was back in high school, so we'll get to that one. But over the past few years, well, let's think. So, I'll go back to the time in Melbourne before I moved to Orlando, which was over 3 years ago at this point. Was the spiritually darkest time of my life, like post becoming a believer, in that there was no community whatsoever, effectively no community. It was very, very tiny, but moving to a city I'd never even been to before, out of college for a job, starting working, getting a taste of like real life engineering, and I knew like 2 people there. But Melbourne was just one of those places where if you're a single person in your mid-20s, you don't really have like a lot of other people in that same walk of life that are like also like young professionals. So there are people in their 20s, but some of them like still live with their parents, and it's not like the crowd I was trying to run with.
Late onset adolescence.
Yeah, for sure. And I lived in like an old person part of town, which is all the town.
I was gonna say, which is Melbourne itself.
Yeah. So that was it was tough, and it was like one of those things where my day was basically like I didn't have any roommates. I lived alone, which I'm quite fond of doing, actually. So I would like wake up, eat breakfast, go to work. On my lunch break, probably go to 7-Eleven, get a hot dog and a Mountain Dew and a donut, go drive at this park by the water.
Lunch of champions.
Yeah, it was dirt cheap too, because
It's like $5.
I mean less than that, because you can get the glizzy and the soda for like $2 as a combo. They'll offer it to you. This is back when the 7-Eleven rewards app was just
Cooking.
hemorrhaging cash. They had to overhaul that. They
Losing money on
I mean, it's like
rewards.
it was like every purchase you made. It's like, oh, here's enough points for a free donut. It's like, how? What's the overhead?
It's a racket.
Yeah. I thought about getting a 7-Eleven franchise, but then I didn't. So, but yeah, my lunch break, I basically do that and go back to work, and then after work, I would just go home and like maybe go to see a movie by myself. Maybe play video games or something. And there was a period of time where like I actually kind of sort of got plugged into this community at a church there, that they would meet on Monday nights and they would have like a young adult kind of thing. There'd be like a little sermon, and then we'd play indoor volleyball for an hour and a half afterwards. And then like it was at a Christian academy, which was like a little high school attached to the church. So there was like an indoor basketball court where we would play volleyball. And I found out on a couple of nights of the week that there would be a group that would play basketball. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Let me play basketball. I tried to get into CrossFit. That didn't last. But I'll tell you this though, there's this CrossFit gym down there called Trinity. I don't know. I don't remember. Let's just say that it was. It doesn't matter what it was.
Okay.
But it's a Christian-owned CrossFit gym.
Okay.
Where it's like they have like
Not unheard of.
right. They had like a monthly fee, but it was more of like, if you can pay this, then please pay it. But their whole thing is like, you can actually pay whatever you are
It's like
comfortable
the
paying.
suggested donation.
Yeah, basically. And because their whole thing is like, we're really like kind of doing a mission with this CrossFit gym. So
That's kind of cool.
yeah, so it was I mean, it was an interesting experience, but I don't know that I was cut out for it.
I certainly know I'm not, so never stepped foot in a CrossFit gym.
Well, there's always
It's always
tomorrow.
yeah,
But anyway,
many days away.
so like my hope and faith that was playing out during that time was like, I was just like, how long am I going to be in this place of just like depression and isolation, without community, without a sense of purpose or direction? And it was just constant. It was like, how can like you going from the college, being in like a college ministry where there's hundreds of people and having this big community, and you're taken out of that and you're placed in this town where you don't know anybody and you're just away from community, but you also know,
And the median age is over 55.
yeah, exactly. And but you also know how important community is to believers. So it's like, surely God isn't calling me to this place to just be without community. That doesn't seem right.
Brought you to Melbourne to die.
That's what it felt like. And so my hope was just like, do I need to like quit my job so I can just move somewhere else? Like, what do I need to do here? And then just after a year and a half, an opportunity presented itself where I was able to transfer from that same company's Melbourne office to the Orlando office. And then that's what I did as soon as I could. And it just kind of just so happened that was like, I knew Nate from college. He was here. We were in the same Bible study when we were in Crew, and then moved into the apartment in the building right next to his, which ended up being a mile from the office, and got plugged into First Pres and whatnot, and so it was just like, all right, that was a spiritual darkness that eventually got me here, and so like that hoping for that community ended up coming to fruition. It was just a matter of like, while you're in that place, like, are you still focusing on God? And I was, to an extent, but it was like that desire for the community that was like causing like internal grief of like I was mourning the community that I used to have and now didn't. So that's that story. Second story on a thing with on another thing of hope and faith. This is actually a good one. Not that wasn't good.
I was gonna say that was a great one.
I mean, I meant good in like a light thing.
Dark one.
Yes. So when I went on a summer mission with crew back in 2014, 2015, we had this little part of it was like we had to raise about $6,000 to go because it was a 6-week summer mission overseas. So not cheap. I'd never done that before.
4,000 of that's airfare alone.
Pretty much. A lot of it's travel. Because it's like you're staying in a hostel, so that's cheap. But the whole support raising is just like, if you've never done it before, just the biggest pain in the butt. Yeah, and just like, all right, I guess I'll ask people for money. This is, I don't know, something that I've never been fond of. And so there was we had like a pre-trip conference thing where like everyone who's going on a summer mission had to go to this. And one of the speakers was like, all right, as you're raising support, don't be afraid to pray big. Pray, like, what's the harm in praying, like, God, please give me someone who will give me $1,000. And why not? If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But you're trusting that God is able to pull that off. And so I prayed that like pretty much every day for I don't know how long. But then there was one weekend where I had two people, one of the guys who was in my Bible study, and then another was a girl that was in crew, had graduated, but I had like kind of barely knew while she was actually in crew. Each of them gave me $500. So that's $1,000.
How about that? Yeah.
What? And so that was like, oh, okay, God, you actually you come through.
And how about that?
Yeah,
the Lord does provide.
Imagine that. And then on that trip, the first of the summer missions was, I had never been on a mission trip before, never left the country before, totally out of my element. And midway through the trip, I was just ready to go home, and I was about to be like, I'm done. Send me home right now. And it was just like the weather was terrible. It was raining this particular day.
Where was it? Where'd you go?
Paris.
Oh, Paris.
Yeah, which seemingly doesn't...
A godless country.
Quite. Which I always feel like every time I bring up that I did a mission trip in Paris, I feel I have to immediately justify that, like, okay, we're not there to like build houses or do some sort of irrigation system.
But Western Europe is quickly turning post-Christian.
Yes. And oh boy, is it. But like, Paris is a city where there are 600,000 university students that attend the universities there. And there are less than 0.5% have any sort of relationship with God, because it's like church and state are totally separate. It's, of all the countries that are open to Christianity, France is the country that owns the fewest amount of Bibles. It's just totally out of whack, and spiritually dark. But the whole intent behind the trip was like, all right, Paris is, like, I don't know, one of the few most visited cities in the world.
It's hugely global.
Yeah, and it's like a kind of like a center point
It's a
of
hub.
Europe.
Yeah.
So if you have people from every country coming to Paris just to see the city, and we were to establish some sort of like local Parisian ministry there of people who are willing to go out and share the gospel with whomever, and then those people are able to take that back to wherever they came from, then it's like that's sort of like a way of reaching every tribe and tongue without actually having to go to every single country yourself.
Which, if we look at Acts, is legitimately how so many churches started.
Yeah.
People are like, why would you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe because it works.
Yeah, it's easier. But so this particular day, midway through the trip, it was raining. The conversations we were having with the students were just like going absolutely nowhere. And it was like 3 days into the trip where a couple of the people on our team had shared the gospel with people, and they like accepted Christ. It was like, oh man, that's crazy. And here I am getting rained on, talking to people who don't care about what I'm saying. And it was like, all right, why am I here? Why did God call me here? And the funny thing is that we had like a fall getaway trip with crew the October leading up to that summer, so it was a few months beforehand. And I was fully set on not going to fall getaway because I had went earlier in college, and I was like, I didn't really get much out of it that time, so I don't really feel like going again. But it was like 2 a.m. the night before the deadline to register, and I kept feeling this tug on my heart of like, you need to go to fall getaway. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll go. So I signed up last minute, went, and it was at that fall getaway that there was a speaker who was talking about Paris Summer Project, which I had heard several times, like at fall getaway or crew meeting and I had guys in my community group who had gone on this trip before who were trying to get me to go. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. The guy who discipled me for my first 2 years went on like a year-long mission in Paris. And while he was gone, the guy who discipled me had also been to Paris and was trying to get me to go. And I was like, can you guys leave me alone? I don't want to do this. But it was at that fall getaway where I'd heard it several times before. And for some reason that time it stuck. And I was like on the spot, like, yep, I'm going to this. I'm going on this trip. And so fast forward to that day where I'm just like, okay, this day sucks. This trip sucks. I hate it here. Why am I here? Like, God, why did you call me to, like, the day before fall getaway to sign up for that, to hear about Paris and decide to go. And now I'm here and just wanting to go home. And it was that day where we ran into this guy who our team had like kind of made contact with the first few days that we were there. He seemed pretty interested in what we had to say. He was coming to our events, and then just sort of like we just lost contact with him, and no one heard from him for like a week. And like the guy who I was with, he and I just happened to see him on that campus. Like, it was raining that day. We're like, all right, let's get out of the rain. Let's go into this little rec room where they have like a foosball table and ping pong or whatever, and we'll just hang out in there. We'll see if there's students in there. We go in there, and that's where he is. So it's like, oh, okay.
The plot thickens.
Yeah. So I'm like, quick, text the two people who had originally met him, because they were also on that campus that day. I was like, he's here. Come find him. And so they found him, got him reconnected. He came to like our picnic that weekend, and it was at that picnic where he ended up accepting Christ. And so
well, there you go.
The old assist. but that day I had met with one of the leaders later on in that day, and I was just telling him about like how crappy the whole day was. and he's like, all right, write down a list of all the idols in your life. And I started writing down a list. And
I think you've told me about that before.
Yeah,
it's like,
I'm pretty sure I have.
Who says this?
Yeah, and so I did, and I kept writing, and I'm like, this isn't looking good. I shouldn't have this many. I ran out of space, so it's like, all right, let me try and fit in another column over here. So it ended up turning out that day was the day that I kind of came to a point where I was like, all right, God, why'd you call me here? And that day was the day that he called me there, which is funny because I don't know if you've been on a mission trip before, but it's like God will for sure use you in some way that you don't really know about going into it, but that he also does some sort of work in your heart while you're there. And then, so it turns out that like our last day there before we went on our little debrief trip, the very last student that I had a conversation with was this guy who was like, he was just like asking really poignant questions, like legitimately interested in what we had to say. And we were talking to him for a couple hours, and he was like, he just kind of brought up like, hey, how do you go about forgiving someone who has shown no desire to be forgiven for a wrong they've done to you? And we're just like, well, that's a
real doozy of a question.
Like, that's a doozy of a question, and an oddly specific one. Is this coming from somewhere?
Yeah.
And so he
just general knowledge, you know. Like,
yeah.
How do you do that?
I just wondered. But so we basically asked him like, all right, well, where's this coming from? And so he kind of ended up telling us about how from the ages of 11 to 14 or 15, his older male cousin sexually abused him, and was just like, okay,
it did get dark.
I was like not seeing this coming. And so we basically told him like, all right, first of all, so sorry that happened. That's horrible. But like when it comes to Jesus, placing your faith in him, what he promises us is that when he returns, all of those injustices and those wrongs will be undone. It's not as if they will have never happened, but it's the pain that we experienced while it happened, and then when Jesus returns, we see it become undone and made right. That makes you grateful for like whatever the trauma was that happened in your life. Like when that day will come, when he comes, we'll be able to look back at like in a moment, all of these wrongs that were done to you, you see them become undone, and you're just like, oh. And so there's that hope in Jesus with that. And so I had like a French Bible with me, and I was like, hey, you are literally the last person we're going to talk to, and we're literally leaving right now. So first of all, like, what do you think about placing your faith in Jesus? And he was like, well, honestly, if you had come to me a few years ago, I would have for sure done that. But I feel like to this point, I've gotten this far in my life without God, and I haven't needed him yet, and I feel like I don't need him now. And we were like,
sheesh.
Oh, okay. Well, I have this French Bible. Would you like to have it? I'm literally never going to use it because
I don't speak French.
Yeah.
Ne parle français.
Yeah. And so he was like, nah, I'm good. And then that was that. And it was like, well, what the heck? I thought for sure, like this was going to be a walk-off home run. This dude's going to accept Christ.
I'm getting on a plane back to America.
Yeah, and I can be like,
mission accomplished.
My job here is done. You're welcome, France. And then, but it left this taste in my mouth of like, come on. Like, there's that, like, I got home from that trip and was just so ready to go back the next year. I was like, there's unfinished business in Paris, because having that guy be the last person I talked to, and sort of like feeling like he was going to accept Christ and he didn't, was like really gave me a heart for the city of like, oh wow, there's like a lot of brokenness in the city. If this guy who I thought was a lock, if he rejected Jesus, was like, okay, then there's more to be done next year, so send me back. So there's that. So hope and faith. There you go. Now
that's it. It's in that story.
Yeah, that's that story. You'll find it. So, on the topic of the story I was going to bring up about someone passing away and where hope and faith plays into this. This will go into the whole long-term part that we always talk about. Like how it plays in over the course of your life. So, growing
Day
up,
one.
Exactly. So, growing up, I was baptized Catholic as a baby, raised Catholic. Parents got divorced when I was 8. From that point on, didn't go to church because my dad was the one who brought us to church. But when he moved out, we didn't go. So, senior year of high school, one of my closest friends, Alton, he passed away in a car accident, and he was like the best. He won best personality for our high school, for our senior class. Great kid, always smiling. Everyone loved him. And it was just like crushing to have that happen. And it just made no sense. So, but it's interesting that you talk about like when you're at your dad's funeral and you didn't even know that Jen was there because you're just like locked in. Like I was a pallbearer at Alton's funeral, and part of it was like we're literally standing outside kind of greeting the people as they come in for the ceremony. I don't know what you even call it, but
service. Yeah.
Service. There you go. And so it's like, I don't remember I remember the other pallbearers. I don't remember anyone else who was there outside of like his family. Mm-hmm. But I remember there being fellow classmates. Couldn't remember who though. And it was weird that this whole thing was really what sparked this desire to pursue God, because it was just strange. Like I'd never been to a funeral before, so obviously never been a pallbearer before, and to be 17 years old and being at the cemetery and seeing one of your closest friends just being lowered into the ground, and just knowing like, well, that's just where he's going to be forever. And it's just like, this just doesn't even make sense. How's this happening right now? And it's like, he literally, like, we just got accepted to UF like a couple weeks before he died. So to know like all of that was just taken away right there was just totally mind blowing to me. And so, but growing up, I had always believed in God, but it was more like logic based as opposed to faith or so
almost theology versus faith.
Yes.
It's like theology is like, okay, maybe I can study and understand what God is supposed to be. Yeah. Faith is like, I actually believe this.
Right. Well, it was more like, okay, I logically believe that God exists because I don't see how all of this exists without a creator. But that was basically the extent of my beliefs, but had no idea what that had to do with my daily life.
It's almost functionally agnostic of like, I acknowledge there's a creator. I acknowledge there's a higher being. I believe it's the Christian God. I just don't know what that means for me specifically.
That's exactly right. But it was Alton's death that sort of caused me to pursue this, like, all right, I believe in God. I'm fully convinced he exists. And if I believe in the God of the Bible that is all-knowing, loving, powerful, etc., then how could he have let this happen to Alton, who was so undeserving of it? And it was... So, it's like I'm hoping for answers. Like I'm trying to pursue these answers. End up having this roommate matching website going into UF where I'm trying to find a freshman roommate. Match with this guy Franklin who lives in Naples. Never met him before. We decided to be roommates. Moved in during the summer of freshman year. I went into it being like, all right, this is gonna be college is gonna be sick. I'm gonna go to the clubs. I'm gonna mac on chicks and
Mac.
Yeah, let's do this thing. And it's like I went to clubs during the summer, and it just felt like this is not where I belong.
I don't think sad boys do well in clubs.
No,
it's so depressing to me.
Yeah, it's like I'm an introvert.
I can't even hear myself in this environment.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like walk up to. I don't even like having small talk with strangers, let alone the idea of like walking up to some woman I've never met and trying to like hit on her. That whole thing.
Where your primary form of communication is just initiating dance floor grinding.
Yeah, and even that was like, geez, this seems aggressive. I don't want to do that. So I'm just like standing there. I'm like, all right, something's not right. I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, I recall a couple of those nights in my own college career.
And so there, I would say like a 2 or 3 weeks before the semester ended, I was having lunch one day and a couple of guys came out to me and asked me about my beliefs on the afterlife. And they were like, all right, you die right now. Where do you think you're going? I'm like, well, I'm Catholic, so I believe if I died right now, I'm going to purgatory because I don't think I'm a terrible person, but
still got some stuff to atone for.
Yeah, still got some stuff to atone for, and I'll eventually get into heaven. And they're like, well, if you believe in the God of the Bible, there is no purgatory. There is...
What?
Yeah, there's heaven and hell. I'm like, well, I've read the Inferno, so you're wrong. but like the thing
entire
is...
Divine Comedy, actually.
Yeah, but I hadn't. I'd only read the Inferno. I've played Dante's Inferno, the video game that came out in 2009 or
Which
whatever.
is loosely based
on God of War. And so, but it was like, okay, no, I didn't know that because I've never actually read the Bible before because I'm Catholic.
Growing up Catholic, were you at like a legit like every mass is in Latin Catholic,
No,
like that
it wasn't like
intense?
that.
Oh, okay.
No.
Because that would be so
nomine
baffling.
Patris,
It'd be
Spiritus
so
Sancti.
baffling to me if that was my experience growing up. But
No,
anyway.
no, it was Florida Catholicism.
English Catholic.
Yeah. So, but I was like, no, I didn't know that because I've never actually read the Bible. And so then that threw me for a loop because I felt like I was just starting to make peace with the whole Alton thing, or not necessarily make peace with it, but like get over it. And so that's starting to get me to like, it flustered me as I started to think about like, whoa, what the heck? So in between that summer semester and the fall semester, I texted Franklin. I was like, because I knew during the summer he was going to summer crew. And so I knew he was a Christian. And I saw like how he lived his life. And so I texted him. I was like, hey, I'm pretty sure I need to become a Christian, but I don't know what that means. And I don't know how to do that. How do I do that? And he was like, just come to the crew meeting with me in the fall and you'll find out. So I did.
It's so ominous. That's a little cultish.
Yeah, I don't know that that's what he said.
Just
but
come with me to the meeting. And
Yeah.
You'll find the answers you seek.
in my mind, that's how it played out.
Morpheus.
Red pill. And so went to the first crew meeting, accepted, like first time really understanding, or first time I felt like I was actually had the gospel shared with me in a manner where it actually made sense and I understood like my brokenness and all that kind of stuff. And so I ended up accepting Christ at that crew meeting. But so that whole like hope and faith was like over the course of my life, there was no hope and faith outside of just like, yes, I believe God exists. So it took 18 years for there to actually be like, oh, okay, I understand what Jesus did for me and what that means. And yes, I do want to live my life for him. And now I now understand that what it means to place your faith in Jesus and the hope that he offers for what is to come for those who have placed their faith in him. So that's the long-term life story for me.
Yeah, I can keep
Batter
mine.
up.
I was gonna say I can probably keep mine relatively short so we don't run crazy over an hour here. But thanks for sharing all that. That was a lot of
Indeed.
interesting caveats along the way. For that, but I think my own journey with faith has been a lot similar in a way, because I mean I grew up in the church we still go to, so I grew up Presbyterian, part of the Protestant tradition of the faith, Reformed Protestant, and so I definitely was like a Bible school, like Bible class kid. Went to a private Christian school, so I was just like very much ingrained with. Like you said, and I kind of mentioned it when you were talking about like this theology versus faith. It's like I know a lot about God, but like what that meant for me practically, I was like kind of unsure. Other than like, okay, it's like I kind of understand the Ten Commandments. There's some kind of moral obligation here. I'm supposed to do certain things. I'm not supposed to do other things. Hardest of which was like respect your parents. It's like, no, why would I do that? Just being a normal kid.
Right.
And so I kind of followed that path, honestly. And I was a really good like Bible student, I think, which was like one of those things where I was like, okay, as long as I have the right answer in Sunday school and Bible class, then I'm obviously a good Christian. As long as I understand this stuff conceptually, I'm fine. Even though I was like, honestly, went through a lot of phases of being just like a total dick in middle school. Like, you know, because you're still a kid. Like, you know, sanctification is a process, not a destination, right?
Yes.
And so, like, literally my whole upbringing, it was so thankful for it in a sense of like, yeah, I definitely grew up a bit sheltered. I definitely grew up kind of with a works righteousness attitude. But at the very least, what I got out of that was a pretty solid understanding of the Bible. So it's like or not understanding, but it's like I at least have the knowledge. I like know what's in here. I just had no idea how to apply it because I was in such a bubble. You know, the moral dilemmas of a 7th grader or 8th grader are not huge. It's like, do I put gum under the desk or do I not? Like, I was just very blessed to not be in any crazy situations as a kid.
Yeah, I need to get my cooking skill up in RuneScape.
Yeah, exactly. Got to mine all this armor. Gotta get my rune armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like I had a very sheltered, provided for upbringing, which does not mean that like everything was perfect by any means, but certainly was not being raised in dire straits or under any great duress. And so in a sense had a very comfortable idea of faith where it's like I don't really feel like I need God because everything seems to be okay. And again, you know, my faith only increases as life got more trying. So I jumped into high school, and high school I landed flat on my face. Freshman year was horrible.
Trench coat.
Yeah, trench coat Jeff. I had no sense of style. Well, you know, the thing is, they don't tell you this about private school, but when you're told to wear a uniform for the first 8 years of your most developmentally like critical years, you don't develop any sense of fashion, style, or understanding of how any of that works.
Okay, yeah.
Any of the social dynamics of like looking cool. Totally. You get no practice. You're just thrown straight into high school, and it's like, yeah, pick an outfit 5 days out of the week now, and you're like, what?
I don't
and
have
so
any.
I literally wore the same jacket pretty much every day because it just covered up whatever.
It covered up my body.
Kind of. Yeah, I was just like, oh, whatever, I don't care. So that was terrible. And then kind of the summer after freshman year is when I actually like went to youth group again. Like I'd kind of like been unplugged from the church for like a hot second of like, I want to just explore life and be a high schooler and kind of figure out a little bit of who my budding personality is. And yeah, and after that was a total failure, I was like, maybe I should go to a place where I know some people from other, you know, not just my school, but other schools, because my private school, we kind of like filtered out into a bunch of different high schools. So it was kind of nice to come back and like see people that were familiar that weren't necessarily at Boone High, and then also like reconnect with people who or also connect with new people that it was like, oh, you go to this church, but I didn't realize that. Like I didn't know you were involved here. So like met JR, met like some other friends that are honestly still around. A good amount of them are still in Orlando, and that kind of set the journey of like, there's probably more to this than I'm aware of. And Went on a couple mission trips in high school, like kind of had that service experience. Like I hadn't really feel like I'd served at any point in my life in any like way that was like sacrificial or like out of a heart of faith. Began learning more, began like having, I think, deeper discipleship and relationships, kind of through that. And then in a similar sense, there was kind of a galvanizing event senior year where we had two friends pass in a car accident, and that led to a lot of the like the why, like a huge gaping why of like, these kids are 17, there's no reason for this to happen, like why is there evil in this world? And of course I had known there's evil in the world, like my dad was a history buff, and I learned a lot about the history of humanity, and I was like, yeah, there's a lot of evil in the world. There's probably more evil than we know what to do with, seemingly, a lot of the time. So, but I think that was like the first time it felt like it hit really close to home of like, this is obviously not right. Like something is definitely wrong. And I think kind of the, like coming out of that is where I think I started to realize the necessity of Jesus' sacrifice, and I'm like, yeah, it's because there's evil like that there needs to be a good God to meet it. I think a lot of people look at it the other way, where it's like, oh, if there's evil in the world, then God can't be there, and I'm like, no, there's evil in the world, and God has vanquished it. Yes. Like if that's not true, then we're effed, right. Basically,
yeah,
colossally. So. And then college, I definitely had like that, I'm going to go to clubs. It lasted like all of semester. Like it was so boring. I was like, this is awful. But didn't really know where I wanted to end up. So kind of like, bobbed in the water my first like couple years in college. Ended up getting involved with NABS, which is, another not crew, but similar campus ministry. And that's honestly where I think a lot of like real discipleship came later in life, because I'm on a college campus. I'm getting hit with all kinds of ideas from 8 different directions, conservatives, liberals, atheists, religious folks, the Mormons, they're everywhere. I don't know why college campuses, but I mean, they were very present at my college. And so just like I'm like, I wanted to figure out this more intellectually, started studying a lot more like broader philosophy than just Christianity, to kind of like open it and understand it. And then, I think in college, I definitely had a couple cool experiences of like just God providing in ways where I was like, wow, I really didn't think you were going to come through that way. But like one of those was, we have the summer training program for NAVS, which is kind of like our summer trip where we'll go to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, of all places. Oh, where are you going to go spread the gospel? The Bible Belt of the United States, where everyone will nominally say, I believe in God. And then when you say, yeah, what does that mean to you? They literally have no idea. It's like, it's a mandatory answer that no one has any clue behind. And I don't want to say no one, but a lot of the folks we talk to, I'm like, okay, yeah. So it's another one of those places where it's like, do you need evangelism in Tennessee? Yeah, you do. Like, there's never a place that, the word of God does not need to be preached. So definitely learned that lesson on that trip. But also, I went as a team leader. First of all, I didn't think I was going to go. It cost way too much. I was already like past the deadline like twice over. Like there was no reason for me to go on this trip.
Yeah.
And basically they're like, yeah, we still need some guy leaders. So if you've even thought about it, just give us, send us an application. Can't hurt. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll send in an application. And one of our staff members had literally challenged me when we were on a service trip to Cincinnati, which again, where of all places can you go? Cincinnati. The Lord needs you in Cincinnati too. But we literally, she was like, you should pray about doing STP every day we're up here. And I was like, that's dumb. Like, I already know I'm not going to go. Literally, like, prayed over it, journaled about it, was in a coffee shop in Cincinnati and was like, shoot, I think I need to go. Like, I think I need to at least. It was like a reticent, like, okay, I'll submit an application, and if the Lord opens the door, I'll go. But there's no way, because I need like $2,500, and I don't have $2,500. So I did that, whatever. And then I put it in, they're like, yeah, okay, we can give you a discount. So it only needs to be like $1,500. And I was like,
That's a sizable discount.
I'm like, okay, because they really just needed leaders, and it's like you're not even supposed to be a leader until you've gone like once as like a participant.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm late. I'm in over my skis. I've never done this before, because you're gonna go and like disciple 4 guys, like a team of other people, and all this stuff, and then
they're gonna need God after you're done with them.
yeah, and I was just like.
Taking
So
out
I was just like,
kneecaps.
okay, where do I go? I will ask the parents. The parents are the only ones, and I'm like, there's no way they're gonna just give me $1,500 to do a summer in Tennessee or whatever. And so I just called my mom up. I was like, hey, I applied for this thing. I would technically need like $1,500 to go. What do you think? And I was just like, I hope she just says no, so I can just finally like tell
Yeah.
everyone like, tried, not gonna happen.
Tried.
Yeah. And she was like, well, if it's something that you really want to do, we can probably make that happen. And I was just like, shoot. Like, I now have no reason not to go.
You're like, Mom, I don't think you heard me. I said $1,500.
$100. Yeah, exactly. And so it was just one of those things where I was like, okay, shoot, well, let's go. So get up there, and like, you know, it's an incredible summer. Honestly, one of the most formative summers of my life, probably. And I just remember being there like a full week, like once we had campers arrive, because like leaders got there like 3-4 days before to kind of like acclimate, get to know each other, and then like all the other people show up. And I'm there, and I'm like, one of the guys is older than me, the other like 2 or 3. I just had an interesting team of people, and I'm like going through, I'm like a weekend, and I'm just like, this was a mistake. Like
Yeah.
clearly I said, Lord, open the door if you think this is where I'm supposed to be. And I was like, we've blown it. Like, I just felt so in over my head. And I just remember like I just opened up my journal, and it was just like whoosh, like all the stuff I had written in Cincinnati, and I was like, okay, like I'm not here on accident, and like I'm not equipped to do any of this myself. You're gonna have to show me the way. And so it really just like that set the pace for like the whole summer of like discipling these other guys. And like I said, like one of them's older than me, and I'm like, what am I supposed to be teaching you? Like, why am I an authority over you, an older person?
Yes.
And it was just really interesting and really growing. And, you know, I think really after that experience, kind of the biggest one for me was, you know, the fellows program. And, you know, that was the same year that my dad passed, was doing that program.
Mhm.
And so it's definitely been a journey of faith where, you know, my theology, like my understanding of God, has not always matched up with like my season of like spiritual fullness. Like, I've not always felt connected to God, even when I was learning so much about
Yeah.
what I think, you know, the character of God is. And there was a quote I had written down from C.S. Lewis, I think, that I just loved because I remembered it from kind of that period of time. But I was thinking about doubt, as I'm like, you can't discuss faith without thinking about doubt. It's like, okay, how does doubt relate to faith? Like, can you
Right,
really say
yeah,
you have
makes
faith
sense.
if you do doubt? But C.S. Lewis said, I found that nothing is more dangerous to one's own faith than the work of an apologist. And like, I think being in that phase in college where you're kind of like like, if you're gonna be a professing Christian in college, people are gonna be like, yeah, why do you believe all that stuff?
Yeah.
And so it just sends you down like some apologetics route of like, yeah, it's like, okay, let's answer this question, answer that question, like defend your faith. And you get so tied up in the reasoning and the logic and all the like, how can I rationally explain this to someone who doesn't believe it?
Mhm.
And it's interesting that, like, you know, C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest Christian theologian, authors, and apologist of the 20th century, was like, there can be almost something no more dangerous than trying to put God in a rational box.
Yeah.
Like, if you're trying to take the scope and breadth and experience of God and put it in your human mind, it's just not gonna entirely work. And he's just too big to be constrained entirely in a rational box.
Yeah, I mean, you're also dealing with people who don't believe in him. So it's like you're trying to it's like the two of you are playing two different sports on the same field. It's like you're on a baseball field and they're playing baseball and you're playing football, and they're like, "What are you doing?" You're like, "I'm playing football." They're like, "But this isn't
What's football?
He's like, "Well, this is why I know how to play."
Yeah.
Well, so what this is?
Yeah, or like the two fish swim past the old fish. He says, "How's the water, boys?" And the fish go on for 20 feet, and then everyone looks around. What's water? Like, it's like they don't even realize what's going on around them. So it's just interesting. And so I think that's just been a big part of my faith journey, has really been like, how do I inhabit this life and not just rationalize it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that's a nice place for me to kind of wrap up kind of how I got to where I am when it comes to my faith journey.
Thanks for sharing. Okay, so to put a bow on this whole episode, I have some scripture here that talks about hope and faith. Mark 11:24. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Hey, that's what the guy told me leading up to that mission trip. Can confirm it works. Not all the time though, but sometimes the answer is no.
But you do have an answer.
Yes. Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. 2 Corinthians 5:7. For we live by faith, not by sight. Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. 1 Peter 1:8-9. Though you have not seen him, you love him, and even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Romans 10:9-10. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. And honestly, all of Hebrews 11, which is the hall of faith, as Christians know it. But basically,
well, really, faith and hope is really the whole Bible, actually, from Genesis to Revelation. So, if you've never given it a read, now's the time.
Yeah.
No, like we always say, none of these lists of verses is exhaustive by any means. The Bible has much to say on almost everything we discuss, and so feel free to do your own research.
Please do. Thanks for tuning in.